Max Blumenthal, as I said earlier, the doyen of American journalists, in the very first rank of world journalists, and a prince among men. And a new father, again. And congratulations on that, Max, to you and Anya, and all love and best wishes to your family. I want to start by asking something not central to what we're going to discuss, but I've watched this Bill Maher show in which this guy that you once saw wearing a keffiyeh produced a joke, a laugh. Oh, how they laughed. Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, Maher, the gutless coward himself, and the guest, they all thought it funny. They made a punchline, a gag line out of dead Gaza babies. And the audience laughed. What does that tell us about? Because frankly, this show is a liberal show. This show is for the liberals, people who would regard themselves as right on. What does it tell us about that class of people?
Well, it tells us that they're so out of touch with actually where most Democrats are. I mean, a new Institute for Middle East Understanding poll and a Siena poll show that the support for Democrats for Israel currently is in single digits. It's gone, and it's never coming back. Wow. But then here you have Bill Maher, who's sort of like, he's like a mid-century liberal, like when liberals liked redlining, and he doesn't want to be around Muslims. He's an anti-Islam activist, a new atheist, who actually is just an atheist Jewish Zionist who poses as something higher and has shined Netanyahu's shoes for years as some kind of hero of civilization. Then you got Thomas Friedman, who's really the voice of globalist liberalism, the voice of Davos, who lived in an ethnically cleansed home that belonged to Hassan Karmi, the former BBC broadcaster, and bought it and made it into the New York Times Jerusalem bureau, who said that Israel had me at hello when he was New York Times correspondent there, and has advanced the Iraq war and basically every other war. And then there's Van Jones. I mean, he's sort of the more interesting character because he's supposed to be relevant to the current generation. He used to run a radical Maoist street action group in the Bay Area that modeled its strategies and tactics off Maoists from Guinea-Bissau. And he was active in prison abolition movements, in Palestine solidarity. He marched against the Iraq war across the Bay Bridge. I actually first met him on a cruise, a fundraising cruise that The Nation magazine, back when I was allowed to write for them, hosted. And I was stunned at what an obvious grifter he was. And at the time he was pushing, the whole green grift. And he's like, I'm a black man from the radical streets of Oakland who wants to save the planet now. So he was catering to that class of liberals, and he was trying to get a job in the Obama administration. Well, that worked out. Then Obama threw him under the bus because of his past radical speeches. And he continues to rise through the liberal ranks. As you mentioned, I actually saw him at a church in New York where a memorial for the Israeli-Palestinian anti-Zionist activist Giuliano Merchamis was held in 2011. And Van Jones just walks in with a keffiyeh wrapped around his neck, looking for attention. And everyone should look up the history of Giuliano Merchamis. Fascinating person, the exact opposite of Van Jones. And I thought it was strange that he had no criticism of Obama while Obama was facilitating the siege of Gaza, and he's wearing a keffiyeh. Flash forward 14 years to today, Van Jones is an asset of the Israel lobby. He's making lots of money speaking at Zionist events, Israeli events, Creative Community for Peace, which was set up by the Israel lobby in Hollywood, constantly hosts Van Jones. He speaks, he wears one of those hostage yellow ribbons. I wouldn't be surprised if he was paid to wear it. And he shills for Israel constantly. Actually, he spoke at the March for Israel in 2023, which was really the March for Genocide. So he's completely sold out. He's the biggest sellout I've ever met in media. And here he is delivering a punchline about dead Palestinian babies. But read between the lines about what Van Jones is saying. He's actually blaming an Iranian and Qatari disinformation campaign for forcing Americans to see images of shredded Palestinian babies, and that they are not organically upset and angry and indignant about seeing the mass slaughter of children by this Israeli death cult in Gaza. This is the actually the current talking point of Netanyahu and all of his cutouts around the West, and it was fed to Van Jones, and Thomas Friedman and Bill Maher predictably cracked up. And now Van Jones has had to come out and apologize because the reaction against him has been so strong, and it's so clear now that he has betrayed any trace of his former self as a Palestine solidarity activist and anti-war activist because he's been bought.
As they're busily showing us their values that we apparently share with Israel, Israel poses as the West. You know the rhetoric. We're fighting them here, so you don't have to fight them there. We're holding their fort. We are the Spartans at the pass in Thermopylae. That they are the barbarians, the other. And we are you. We are PLU. People like us is the prevailing narrative. We now see what they're doing to some of the stars and starlets of liberal Europe, like Greta Thunberg. They have tortured Greta Thunberg, who was the toast of the literati, the talkerati, only months ago. They're forcing her on her knees with a zip tie to kiss the Israeli flag. They are mistreating her to the extent that she has become sick almost immediately in that hellhole that they've got her in the desert, and nobody knows if and when she's going to be released. The values of the West, if they are the values of Israel, lie bankrupt and tattered now, don't they?
Well, Theodore Herzl proclaimed that Israel, the future state of Israel, the Jewish state, as he called it, would be a rampart of civilization against barbarism. And now it has become a reflection of the most severe and barbaric characteristics of the West distilled into a fascistic, messianic, and segregationist version of Judaism that is destabilizing its Western sponsors that facilitated this genocide. And the interaction between the flotilla activists and the Israeli state, it continues to reveal the true nature of Israel. Of course, we remember the Mavi Marmara back in 2010, a Turkish ship which was intercepted by Israeli commandos on international waters. 9 members of that ship were massacred. There was actually a fight aboard that ship. And since then, flotillas have been completely passive, using, civil disobedience techniques. But actually, if you look at these last few Sumud Gaza Freedom flotillas, they're fully cooperative with the Israeli police. They're avoiding violence at all costs. So the security minister, the messianic fascist Itamar Ben-Gvir, has declared in advance of this latest wave flotilla that the flotilla passengers would be treated like terrorists, which is actually consistent with the Trump administration's rhetoric now about residents of American inner cities and the left. Everybody's just terrorists. And that to deter future flotillas, which are seeking to bring aid, not actually to enter Israeli territory, but to bring aid to the occupied people of Gaza, they would be treated harshly and abused. He said they would do that. Itamar Ben-Gvir appears as one of the first Israeli officials in front of the flotilla activists who'd been intercepted about 72 hours ago. and mocks them and taunts them, calls them terrorists, says they should all be sent to Gaza, which is ironic because that's where they're trying to go. And then we hear from those who are gradually released, one after another, that Greta Thunberg, the most prominent passenger on that flotilla, possibly the most prominent activist in the world today, civil society Western activist, has been abused. That she was forced to pose for pictures with Israeli flags, that an Israeli flag was forcibly wrapped around her neck, that she was handcuffed with an Israeli flag, that she was zip tied. One person actually said she was dragged by her hair. I don't know if that's true, but that seems pretty consistent. And all the activists said they were basically starved and deprived of water for about 48 hours. So where are all of the globalist foundations and world leaders from Ursula von der Leyen to Barack Obama who sat for photo ops with Greta Thunberg and used her and exploited her when she was much younger to make themselves seem like they were actually out to save the world from climate change? When Greta Thunberg gets older and her perspective starts to develop and sharpen, she realizes that while climate change might be a threat, in her view, to humanity, the more immediate threat is the Israeli military and the Zionist death cult behind it. And when she goes to challenge that siege, which, by the way, Obama and Ursula von der Leyen facilitated, they're nowhere to be found. They're not speaking up for her. It's total silence as she is abused and potentially tortured in an Israeli prison. So she has lifted the mask on the entire liberal transatlantic class, which wants to seem like humanitarians, by challenging the most immediate threat to humanity.
To the big enchilada, Max, Trump posted an order, albeit today's orders are posted on social media, on Truth Social in this case, an order to Netanyahu, who, on the face of it, has to obey his orders. After all, he pays all the bills, he provides all the guns, to cease. He used the word immediately. Stop bombing Gaza. Not least because how can you possibly release the hostages under bombardment? How can you find, locate, extricate the hostages, as they call them, captives, as others call them? And Netanyahu simply defied him. Unless, of course, it wasn't really an order that Donald Trump gave him. It was a ruse. What's your take?
Well, I think Donald Trump wants this violence in Gaza to end for political reasons, maybe even cynical reasons, perhaps even so he and the U.S. military can pivot to another war and stop being bogged down here. But he's applied no leverage. And the Israeli public is turned solidly against the war, even as they still hold genocidal attitudes in large majorities. That might seem paradoxical to many viewers, but they want, as you said, they want to get the Jewish lives, the remaining Jewish lives, out of Gaza, and their society has become exhausted by this continuous genocide. So there's this large segment out there in the streets, and Donald Trump on his Truth Social site actually posted a photo of a protest for a ceasefire. So I think there's a level of sincerity there, but the power dynamics are so extreme in Netanyahu's favor. Donald Trump is so firmly under Netanyahu's thumb that even as he explicitly calls for Netanyahu to stop the bombing, the Israeli army escalates. Yesterday, it bombed an UNRWA Center for the Blind in central Gaza in Al Rimal. A deliberate airstrike from a U.S.-made jet with a U.S.-made bomb. There's no leverage being exercised because Trump could never suspend weapons or threaten sanctions as George H.W. Bush did. Nothing is happening. And so they're simply pleading with their own masters to stop something. And it really reveals the power dynamics at play. Netanyahu has actually already altered the deal that Hamas agreed to. And he's the one declaring, yes, but if there is peace and Israeli troops withdraw, Netanyahu will face the full wrath of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who are the linchpin of his coalition, who want no end to this genocide, want ethnic cleansing of Gaza. But the legal proceedings against Netanyahu will gather steam again, and he'll have to go back to court, and he won't enjoy immunity. And he will not be able to, he'll lose momentum on igniting a war post October 7th or even on October 7th against Iran, which he blames for October 7th. So Netanyahu has to keep this war going, and that means sacrificing the hostages, the captives, the POWs, the Israeli POWs who are in Gaza. And remember on October 7th what Israel did. When hundreds of people were captured, they executed the mass Hannibal directive to kill as many Israeli captives as possible to deny Hamas negotiating leverage. And that has continued throughout the past 2 years, where, as even Israeli outlets like Haaretz have reported, something like 25 Israeli captives have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. So they're fine eliminating them. Members of Netanyahu's coalition openly say this isn't about the hostages. Smotrich, Orit Strzok, who is a national home minister, has said the hostages are actually getting in the way of a total victory. So what we're witnessing here is a betrayal of the majority of the Israeli public and the domination of Trump by this sectarian leader commanding a narrow fascist messianic coalition.
Lastly, Max, how long will we be able to go on talking like this? The lobby has acquired TikTok. It won't be long, if it hasn't happened already, until you and I are nowhere to be found on TikTok. CBS by the same man, CNN perhaps by the same man. All kinds of tyrannical crackdowns on freedom of speech from the state, your state and our state over here. These people are making a determined last stand by using their ability to force other people to sell their platforms and their ability themselves, of course, to buy them. Will it work?
Well, if it works, it will be without our consent. They are trying from London to Washington to establish a techno-feudal dictatorship and impose a regime of terror to protect the 1% that they represent. That's so clear. In London, when hundreds and hundreds of activists, pensioners, the most decent part of humanity, is being hauled off to prison every week for simply declaring their support for an anti-war group, Palestine Action, that has never injured or killed another person and has only carried out direct action to stop the genocide in Gaza. It's clear from the anti-protest directives of the Starmer government, which are carried out in direct response to the killing of 2 Jews in Manchester, one by a police officer, as though they've ever changed any policy following the killing with British facilitation of tens of thousands of children in Gaza. It's clear in Washington, where the key advisor to Donald Trump, the Goebbels of the Trump administration, National Security Advisor Stephen Miller, has declared that the left is a terrorist organization and that troops must be sent across American cities. Now they're being sent to Portland. They've been sent to Memphis. They're turning Chicago into a war zone in order to neutralize these terrorist networks. He's defined tens and tens of millions of Americans as terrorists simply for their belief. And the Department of Homeland Security has issued a directive that those who hold anti-capitalist views or oppose traditional morality are holding views that are indicative of terrorism. What we have here in the United States is a dictatorship in the making. I would have mocked people for saying that in Trump's first term, but it's very clear the barrier to that is the courts, what's left of them, and the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of association, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech, something you don't actually have over there in the UK. So the Starmer government is actually leading the way for this
Yeah.
attack on the last vestiges of freedoms